So if the brother is sitting in the back, and please move up, fill up the front seats. Inshallah, we can begin. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of you brothers and sisters. It's great to see you all joining us for night 3 of our 2017 Ramadan program. As you know, we've been blessed to have for these first 3 nights of Ramadan, for this first week of Ramadan, Al-Hajj Dr. Sadiq Qasim. And inshallah tonight he will be having his final night of this weekend with us, inshallah. Before I bring him up, I'd just like to go over a couple of announcements. I'd like to remind you all that inshallah we will be having the bonfires for the youth program after the lecture, inshallah, every Saturday night. So we had the first one yesterday night. Inshallah, the next bonfire will be next Saturday night. And inshallah, you can all join us for the next set of programs, which will be next weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, with Samahat Sayyid Haidar Bahr al-Ulum. And we will not be having any English programs throughout the weekdays. So it will only be next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but the Arabic programming will continue all 7 days of the week. Brothers and sisters, as I said, we are blessed to have with us Hajj Dr. Sadiq Qasim, and inshallah tonight he will be speaking to us on the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا السراج المنير المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد ومحمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين أما بعد, my dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, قُلْ ادْعُوا الرحمن قُلْ ادْعُوا الله وادعوا الرحمن أيا ما تدعوا فله الأسماء الحسنى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. The month of Ramadan is oftentimes called the month of mercy, Shahr al-Rahmah, but in order to understand the nature of the mercy of the month, I think we need to first and foremost understand the nature of Allah's mercy. So the mercy of the month of Ramadan is really a function of Allah's mercy. And if we want to understand Allah's mercy, we need to first and foremost understand the mercy of the Prophet, because the Prophet puts really a human face to the magnitude of Allah's mercy. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Prophet a rahmah, meaning a mercy, as translated in English. But I think this verse, oftentimes, many of us have heard of it. Many of us have heard this verse recited, but I think few of us have actually taken the time to understand the implications of this verse. Because when you understand the implications of this verse, the nature of the Prophet's mercy, I think you get a better understanding of the nature of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you understand the nature of Allah's mercy, then you can get a better appreciation of the magnitude of the month that we're undertaking right now. So tonight's discussion will be divided into 2 parts, actually 3 parts. In the first part, we'll try to get a better understanding of this ayah, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, to get a better in-depth understanding of what does Allah mean when He calls the Prophet a mercy to all of creation. So that's the first part. In the second part, we're going to look at the outcome of the Prophet's mercy on humanity and creation. And then in the third part, we'll talk about the nature of the Prophet's mercy versus the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and some lessons that we can take away during the month of Ramadan. But before we continue, please give me a loud salawat. So this ayah is really interesting. It's in Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah 107. Allah says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This is an interesting ayah for, I think, 2 fundamental reasons. The first reason is you'll notice that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called the Prophet a mercy or a rahmah, He doesn't define or confine the Prophet's mercy to a specific period of time. He says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, meaning we sent you as a mercy to all of creation. So there is no time component to the Prophet's mercy. So even though the Prophet lived for 63 years, this ayah is telling us that the nature of the Prophet's mercy extends well beyond those 63 years, well beyond the Prophet's existence. So that's the first interesting component of this ayah. How can an individual's mercy, how can an individual's characteristics extend beyond their own lifetime? You know, many of us, when we die, that's it. People will forget about us and our existence on earth. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying something fundamentally counterintuitive to our existence, which is that the Prophet, who lived over 1400 years ago, his mercy was not confined to a specific period of time, but rather extends throughout creation. So how can this be? The second interesting thing about this ayah is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not limit the Prophet's mercy to a specific group of people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very explicitly says, لِلْعَالَمِينَ وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Notice Allah doesn't say لِلْعَرَبِ, even though the Prophet, his message was initially specific for the Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula. He doesn't say وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَجَمِ, which means the non-Arabs. He doesn't say وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَرَبِ وَالْعَجَمِ, meaning the Arabs and the non-Arabs. But he says وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So there's the interesting thing about this ayah is, in addition to the Prophet's rahmah or mercy being expansive, not limited to a specific time, it's not limited to a specific group of people. So the question that we want to answer here tonight is this possible? How is the Prophet's mercy not defined by time or by space? Can such a thing occur? And to really address this question of how the Prophet's mercy can be so expansive, how the Prophet's rahmah can be so expansive, we need to re-examine the Prophet's life and the impact that it's had on people that's allowed the mercy to continue well beyond his existence. So we'll talk about that, but first please give me a loud salawat. So how can a individual's characteristics extend beyond their life? Well, the Prophet has a beautiful hadith that I think many of us should know and take to heart. The Prophet says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمْ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ صَدَقَ جَارِيَةٍ أَوْ عِلْمٌ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ أَوْ وَلَدٌ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ. When an individual dies, all of their actions come to an end except for three things: Sadaqa jariyah, continuous charity; أو علم ينتفع به, which means beneficial knowledge; أو ولد صالح يدعو له, which means a righteous child that makes dua. So if you ever want to examine the legacy of an individual, the Prophet is saying that the only thing that an individual leaves when they pass away, when they leave this life, can be really defined in these three categories: continuous charity, beneficial knowledge, and a righteous child. So let's look at the Prophet's life within this own context. Let's examine the Prophet's life in account with respect to his own words. So the first category that the Prophet talks about is this concept of Sadaqa jariyah. It's a very interesting concept in Islam. So many of you are familiar with the concept of Sadaqah. Can anyone tell me what a Sadaqah is? And I think everyone, children and adults probably has an understanding of Sadaqah. Does anyone know, can anyone translate the word Sadaqah for me in English? Charity, right? So oftentimes when we think of charity, we think of a one-time act of giving. So for example, at every masjid that I've ever been to, they'll have a box that says charity, and the expectation is that you pull out $3 or $5 or $10 or $20 and you put it in the donation box. This is the concept of charity as we know it. But there's another concept of charity that the Prophet here is talking about, and that's the concept of continuous charity. So a one-time act of charity, you'll receive the benefit for the act when you make the act. So for example, let's say you see a homeless person on the streets, you buy him a sandwich, or you give him a few dollars, you will receive the benefit of that act of charity so long as that poor person benefits from it. But as soon as they've eaten the food, or as soon as they've spent the money, the benefit for your act will disappear. A continuous act of charity is something different in that long after you've made the donation, people continue to benefit from it. So how can that happen? One time the Prophet, when he was in Medina, the following verse is revealed to the people, the early Muslims. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. You shall never attain righteousness, or you shall never be seen highly in the eyes of God until you sacrifice out of that which you love. لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون وما تنفقوا من شيء فإن الله به عليم. And whatever you donate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowledgeable, all wise. So when this ayah was revealed to the early Muslims, many of them started to ask, Ya Rasulullah, what does this ayah mean? So the Prophet tells them that in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you attain a degree of righteousness in relation to the amount of sacrifice that you give forth towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you sacrifice out of the things which you love for the sake of Allah, you'll get degrees of reward in relation to the amount of sacrifice. So one of the Prophet's early companions was a man named Abdullah al-Ansari. He said, Ya Rasulullah, the most beloved thing to me is this piece of land, which that at that time was called Bir Hay, which means the plantations of hay. He said, Ya Rasulullah, this is the most beloved thing in my existence, and I give it to you. I donate it for the sake of the Muslim Ummah. The Prophet takes this land and builds one of the first masjids in Muslim history. So the point being that when this individual, Abdullah al-Ansari, donates the piece of land, he received the benefits in proportion to the amount of sacrifice that he gave. It was his most beloved land. So when the Prophet built a masjid on top of it, the amount of reward that Abdullah Ansari received was equivalent to every time that an individual went and made salat in that building, Abdullah Ansari would receive a reward. It wasn't a one-time act of charity, but rather it was a continuous act of charity, sadaqah jariyah, which people continue to benefit from. Now when this ayah was revealed, other people became inspired by the Prophet's example and started donating of their time and effort in other capacities. For example, Imam Ali alayhi salam, what he started to do is he started to donate out of his time. And one of the main things that was missing at the time was, when people were traveling from city to city, there were no rest stations. So you know how if you're going to, like, let's say Toledo, or if you're going to Chicago, you have rest stops along the way where you can fuel up and, drink water and what have you. Back in the olden days, if you're going from Medina to Mecca, there were no rest stops. So Imam Ali alayhi salam noticed that this was a tremendous need, and he started digging wells right outside of the city of Medina. This is an area that's known in outside of Medina as Abiyar Ali. I don't know how many of you have been to Medina or Mecca. You'll notice that there's a series of wells that were dug up by Imam Ali as a source of charity for the travelers going from Medina to Mecca. And they built a masjid on top of it called Masjid al-Shajara. The point being that everyone was inspired by the Prophet's example and started donating their time and effort in a strategic way that was not just limited to a one-time act of charity, but was something that could be beneficial long-term. And that's why you'll notice that if you ever go to Hajj, if Allah blesses you with the opportunity to go to Hajj, one of the places where you wear your ihram is Masjid al-Shajr or Abiyar Ali. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, long after he made this one-time act of charity, sadaqah jariyah, people still continue to benefit. Every individual who wears their ihram at the Abiyar Ali, Imam Ali will receive the sadaqah, the benefits of the sadaqah from that well. Salawat. And it wasn't just Muslims who were inspired by the Prophet's example. There were non-Muslims as well. One of the most generous non-Muslims was this Jewish man named Mukhayraq. Mukhayraq was a Jew of one of the tribes of the Jewish tribes of Medina. So he was a very loyal individual to the Prophet. He participated in the Battle of Uhud. You'll remember that the Battle of Uhud is the second battle to occur in the history of Islam. So Mukhayraq, this non-Muslim, this Jewish man, participated with the Muslims in the Battle of Uhud against the non-believers. Mukhayraq was a wealthy merchant, and during the battle, Mukhayraq was injured and killed on the battlefield. On the battlefield, as he's dying, he pledges his wealth and his land to the Prophet and to the Muslims. And the lands of Mukhayraq became, taken over for the interests of the Muslim Ummah. And the Prophet called Mukhayraq the most generous of the Jewish people in Medina. This is all written, by the way, in the Seerah of Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq, the well-known biographer. The point being that the Prophet's example of mercy inspired both Muslims and non-Muslims to make charity in a very strategic manner, so that you have Imam Ali digging these wells that people still continue to benefit from today. You have Abdullah al-Ansari donating his land, which eventually became built into a masjid. You have Mukhayraq donating his land and wealth. And this example continued long after the death of the Prophet. So, for example, does anyone know the story of the very first university? Actually, before we get into that, does anyone know what the oldest university is in the world? Any guesses? Oxford, okay. Any other guesses? Yes? Harvard, okay. Well, so Oxford and Harvard, you're off by about 200 years, Oxford. And Harvard, you're off by about 1,000 years. So the first university was actually founded in 859 of the Common Era by a Muslim lady named Fatima al-Fihri, she founded this university in Fez, Morocco. This is according to the United Nations Society for Culture and what have you, UNESCO. They've designated this as being the oldest university. So the story of Fatima al-Fihri is very interesting. She was the daughter of a wealthy merchant who was living at the time in Morocco. Her father passes away and he gives her some inheritance. So Fatima al-Fihri takes her inheritance money and she dedicates it to the founding of a school and to the founding of a library and a masjid in the city of Fez, Morocco. This college would go on to be named Jami'at al-Qayrawayn. So it's called Al-Qayrawayn University. This is a very interesting university because, the point being that Fatima al-Fihri took her money and she dedicated it to this continuous act of charity, Sadaqah Jariyah. She was inspired by the example of the Prophet to found a strategic charitable institution that would benefit individuals within the community long after her death. It wasn't just a one-time act of money, but rather it was a strategic donation that would benefit the Muslim community. It's a very interesting university. Actually, one of the most famous alumni, or one of the most famous students of Jami'at al-Qayrawayn was a Catholic pope. Pope Sylvester II studied at this university that was founded by a Muslim woman in the year 859. Now think about that. Oftentimes when they talk about Muslim women being oppressed, we say to them, it was a Muslim woman who was actually a founder of one of the oldest universities in the Muslim world. And there's actually much more to be discussed here. There's a wonderful book written by a man named George Maqdisi called The Rise of Colleges, where he talks about the history of the Islamic colleges, their rise, and how they influenced the subsequent founding of Oxford University, Cambridge, and many of the Western universities. The point being that when the Prophet says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ صَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ. So the rahmah of the Prophet, first and foremost, inspired individuals to become more merciful in terms of their communities. It inspired them to make these strategic acts of charity that people still long to benefit from. People were inspired by the prophetic act of mercy, and they created institutions that would enable the mercy of the Prophet to extend long after his death. But it doesn't just stop at the concept of sadaqah jariyah. Because in the hadith that I mentioned, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به. The second thing that the Prophet left behind that has been a tremendous source of mercy for humanity is beneficial knowledge. And this beneficial knowledge is really most represented by the Quran. As all of you know, we're in the month of Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. So it's the month of Ramadan within which the Quran was revealed as a guidance for the people. هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. And as a clear example that enables mankind to essentially understand the guidance. So the point being that this book, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to it as a guidance to all of humanity, and not just as a guidance to the Arabs or a guidance to the Muslims, but rather hudan linnas. Now this is an interesting idea here. We'll get into how the Quran was a guidance to humanity, but first please give me a loud salawat. Salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. The Quran is really unique among world books in that it's the only book that we know of that has maintained the same shape, form, and style since the time of its revelation. Meaning, if you look at the book of the Quran that was compiled by Imam Ali during the time of the Prophet, it's the very same book that we have in our hands today. No other book in human history can lay claim to such a fact. You know, even in modern times, you'll notice if you go to your schools, your textbooks often come in multiple editions. So the first edition, second edition, third edition. With regard to the Quran, there's only one edition. And this edition is maintained consistency across whether you're in Uzbekistan or China or India or Dearborn or Boston or South America or Antarctica. Now, the consistency of the message of the Quran has actually acted as an inspiration for many people. I'll give you one example, one firm example, and then we can go into the rest of the discussion. There's a recent book by a scholar in King's College in London called The Enlightenment Quran. The Enlightenment Quran. It's written by a man named Ziyad al-Marsafi. And in this book, what Ziyad al-Marsafi examines is he asked the question, you know, Europe was in a period of dark ages. The dark ages is when Europe had no clue about science, no clue about arts. They were really living in an age of superstition. So Ziyad al-Marsafi was asking, what caused Europe to go out of the dark ages and into the age of the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment is when you have these new ideas evolving about science, about literature, about art, about other aspects. So what he was able to do is he traced the rise of the Enlightenment with the translation of the Quran into the European languages. So he says that the Enlightenment was really triggered not by some super event, but the event was the translation of the Quran into the European languages. Because when the Europeans, like Voltaire and Rousseau and Napoleon, among others, started reading the English translation of the Quran, they became inspired by the words of the Quran, and it caused them to think more critically. You know, there are numerous verses in the Quran that challenge mankind to think critically about their situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Isra, for example, says, وَلَا تَقْفُوا مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. Do not follow that with which you have no knowledge. For إِنَّ السَّمْعَ, your hearing, وَالْبَصَرَ, and your seeing, وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. You'll be held accountable for these things that you do. So the Europeans, when they read verses like this, it caused them to think more critically and to enable them to come out of superstition. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَوْ أَنزَلْنَا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى جَبَلٍ لَرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِعًا مُتَصَدِّعًا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. Had we revealed this Qur'an on a mountain, you would see the mountain shaking, خاشعًا متصدعًا من خشية الله, shaking in reverence to the Qur'an. The power of the Qur'an cannot be underestimated. It's really a unique book in terms of its compilation. And just to give you one more idea of the uniqueness of the Qur'an, many of you know that of the New Testament. The New Testament obviously being the newest book of the Bible. There is a Christian scholar named Bart Ehrman, E-H-R-M-A-N, who's written a book called Lost Christianities. And he's a scholar at Duke University. So what Bart Ehrman wanted to do is he wanted to calculate the number of differences between the current versions of the New Testament. Meaning, he wanted to see how many versions of the Bible are there out there today. And what he came up with is he says that there are nearly 5,400 different copies of all or part of the New Testament. Think about that. There are 5,400 different versions of the Bible, meaning fundamentally different in their content and in their scope. So then Bart Ehrman wanted to go on and say, well, how many differences are there between these different versions? Maybe there's just some small differences in terms of wording. He goes on to say that we find that no two of these copies agree in all of their wording, meaning none of these copies really sort of matches each other. And he says nobody knows for certain how often they changed them because no one yet has been able to count all of the differences between the surviving manuscripts. Meaning people have tried to count the differences between the 5,400 different versions of the Bible that are out there, and they haven't been able to come up with the number of differences between them. Some put the estimate around 200,000, others at around 300,000. Perhaps it's simplest to express this figure in comparative terms. There are more differences among our Bibles than there are words in the New Testament. So think about that. If the Bible contains 300,000 words, there are more than 300,000 differences between the different versions. Now, going back to the Quran, the reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. The reason this Quran has served as a guidance for humanity is because it's the only book that we know of that has remained in its original form from the time of its revelation up until the time today. No other book can lay claim to such a fact. Salawat. So the rahmah of the Prophet was the fact that he was a honest transmitter of the Quran based on the revelation, and more importantly, he was the living upright version of the Quran. So the Quran is the theoretical book of life. The Prophet in his manners and in his behaviors is really the walking practical version of the Quran. So far we've talked about the contribution of the Prophet's life within two components. We said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that we've only sent you as a mercy for humanity. The mercy of the Prophet has really been dependent on the Prophet's inspiration for humanity. In the first part, he inspired many of his followers to make these strategic acts of charity, like sadaqah jariyah. In the second part, the Prophet's example and the revelation that the Prophet carried inspired individuals to think, about the creation of Allah. It inspired the entire enlightenment of Europe, and it inspired mankind to think. The third category of the Prophet's mercy relates to the Prophet. It relates to waladun salihin yad'u lah. We'll get into that, but first, please give me a loud salawat. So the third thing that an individual leaves behind when they die is a righteous child. Meaning, if you've raised good children, the children are a reflection of your legacy. if your children are people that just cause trouble in the land, that cause hardship for people, your legacy will be by extension tainted. So that's why the Prophet says, صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. So the third component that the Prophet has left behind is righteous children. And this concept really was beautifully articulated in the following instance. One time a group of people came to the Prophet. They said, Ya Rasulullah, you've done so much for us, you've guided us, you've enlightened us. How can we ever repay you? Do you want some money? Do you want some position? So the Prophet didn't know how to answer. And this is when the following ayah became revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet to tell the people, قُل. Here Allah is telling the Prophet, قُل, say to them, قُل, لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. Say, I ask of you no payment, no compensation, except for the love of the close of kin, except for the love of the Ahlul Bayt. Now when this ayah was revealed, many of the people started to ask, Ya Rasulullah, من هؤلاء الذين نودهم الذين وجبت علينا مودتهم? Who are these people that you've obligated us to love? And he says, Ali wa Fatima wa abnahuma. And he said, Ali and Fatima and her sons. And this, by the way, is narrated in the book of Tafsir al-Kabir of al-Tabari, one of the leading Sunni scholars, and also in the book of Tafsir of al-Zamakhshari. Now, it's an interesting idea. Think about it. The Prophet has done this tremendous benefit for humanity, and he asks for nothing except for the love of his close of kin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, قُلْ مَا سَأَلْتَكُم مِّنْ أَجْرًا فَهُوَ لَكُمْ. Whatever gift I've asked of myself is really for your benefit. So when the Prophet is asking us to love the Ahlul Bayt, this is really ultimately for our own benefit, because whatever the Prophet asks in terms of payment is really payment for ourselves. So this ayah really requires some deep discussion, and we'll get into that. But first, please give me a loud salawat. So this ayah is an interesting ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Say, I ask of you no payment except the love of the close of kin. Now the word love, mawadda, is translated as love in English. And it's actually an interesting translation. The word mawadda is actually something very different from the concept of love. The linguists have done studies on this, and they say probably one of the most misunderstood words in the English language is the word love. Think about it, because we use the word love in so many different contexts that oftentimes the meaning of the word loses meaning. So for example, we say, I love going to Shatila, right? So it's the month of Ramadan. Or I love to drink coffee, all right? So you're using the word love to describe your relationship to a physical object like shatila or, coffee. But at the same time, we use the word love to describe our relationship with our mother. I love my mother. I love my father. I love my spouse. So we're using the same word to describe a relationship with the people who gave birth to us, as we are describing our relationship to a place that sells us baklawa. All right? So this is the problem with the English language, is that it oftentimes oversimplifies some deep context and deep meaning with regard to the words. The word love is one such word in the Arabic language. The Arabic language does not just have one word for the concept of love, but at least 24 words. There's, for example, mahabba, there's mawadda, there's gharam, there's ishq, there's ghazal. There's many different words that define the concept of love. Here the word mawadda is actually linked to one of the 99 names of Allah, Al-Wadud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called the ever-loving. And the concept of Al-Wadud is Allah loves us because He knows us. Allah's love is contingent upon knowing us. So the point being that here when Allah uses the word mawadda is not just simply saying I love the Ahlul Bayt because I put, I see this all over Dearborn. Like, people putting decals saying Ya Hussein on their car, right? And this is sort of like, their love of Ahlul Bayt, or, Ya Ali, or, something like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very purposely using the word mawadda, meaning this is a love based on the understanding of the Prophet's relationship with his family. Because when you understand the Prophet's relationship with his daughter, when you understand the Prophet's relationship with his grandsons, when you understand the Prophet's relationship with his son-in-law Imam Ali alayhi salam, then you'll truly understand the concept of mercy, of rahmah. If you don't, look at how the Prophet interacted with his daughter. Look at how the Prophet interacted with his young grandsons. When he would, whenever see them, he would kiss them on the cheek. He would give them hugs. He would give them some sweet candies. Look at the relationship that the Prophet had with his daughter. The point being that the mercy and the love of the Prophet towards his family is really the highest model of what it means to be merciful. And if you want to understand the mercy of Allah, you need to first and foremost understand the mercy of the Prophet towards his own family. Now, unfortunately, we as Muslims have failed to understand the Prophet's mercy. We know of many incidences in the Muslim community of men beating their spouses, of men beating their children. We ask, are these actual followers of the Prophet's legacy? قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى, that I ask of you nothing except the love of Allah except the love of my close of kin. Because the individuals who understand the relationship of the Prophet with his family will understand the notion of mercy, what it means to become merciful, which leads us to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Irhamu man fil ard, yarhamakum man fil sama." Show mercy towards those who are on earth, and the one in the sky and the heavens will show mercy to you. Meaning Allah's mercy is dependent on our own ability to be merciful towards each other. If we're unable to be merciful towards each other, then there's no hope for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would Allah show His mercy and kindness and generosity to you if you're not showing your mercy, generosity, and kindness towards your fellow human? And this is the situation of the Muslims today. We ask ourselves, are the Muslims being merciful to each other? Well, if we look at Yemen and Saudi, we see absolutely no mercy. If we look in Syria, we see no mercy. If we look in our own community here in Dearborn, or in Boston, or in Washington, look at how the Muslims are treating each other with a lack of mercy. And then we wonder about how Allah's mercy isn't being showed on us. Have we shown mercy towards each other? Meaning, have we shown the generosity that's expected of us towards each other, and with respect to expecting the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this, by the way, has very real life implications. The Grand Mufti, the Grand Sheikh of Mecca, a man named Sheikh Adil al-Kilbani. So he was the man who was leading Salat Jama'ah in Mecca. He was the Grand Mufti of Mecca up until last year. And they had an interview with him last year. And they asked him, the thoughts and ideas of ISIS, are they similar to the thoughts of Salafism, or, the Wahhabi, school of thought in Saudi Arabia? He said, yes, ISIS, in terms of their beliefs, we share the same beliefs with ISIS. So the Sheikh Adil al-Kilbani, the Sheikh of Mecca, agreed that the beliefs of ISIS were the same as the beliefs of the Saudi kingdom. But he said the only difference is in terms of the way they apply those beliefs. So we apply a more refined form of this belief. Now the question becomes, why does ISIS and why does the family of Saudi Arabia lack humanity? That's because first and foremost, they've not understood the relationship of Ahlul Bayt. They have not understood the relationship of the Prophet towards his own children, towards his own wife, towards his own spouse. If you don't understand that relationship of rahmah, there is no hope for you with regard to the relationship of the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this month. But this brings us to the month of Ramadan, because the month of Ramadan is the month of mercy. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, if Allah wanted to punish the Muslims, He would not have given them the month of Ramadan and Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Ahad. Meaning, this is our opportunity to make up for whatever indiscretions or for whatever mistakes we've made in the past year. This is the month of Rahmah. And if we want the month of Allah to be merciful, if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be merciful to us, first and foremost, we need to change ourselves to be merciful towards each other. So let's take the month of Ramadan as an opportunity to think, what kind of legacy are we leaving behind? Are we leaving behind a legacy like Fatima al-Fihri? Are we leaving behind a legacy like Imam Ali? Are we leaving behind a legacy like Mukhayraq, the best of the Jews, who enabled people to become merciful to each other? Or are we leaving a legacy that's similar to the one that's being talked about by Sheikh Adil al-Kilbani of the Grand Masjid, where we're harsh and harmful to each other? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to benefit from this month of mercy, Shahrul Rahmah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to be merciful towards each other so that we can be merciful, so that we can gain the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا أصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. صلوات.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Excuse me, one moment, please. Brothers and sisters, please, tomorrow when you come into the masjid area, please listen. Take your shoes off carefully and put them on the side neatly. They're scattered all over here. Allah khalikum, please, just put them on the side. Thank you very much.